Hello there and welcome to my video on Thelemas 3 Eons. I've decided to do this video at this point because the next one following this involves the study of the Empress, and that particular video will refer to different eons. So in order to put the Empress into context, we'll first look at the 3 eons that Thelema identifies. I've just first of all just given a definition of an eon as a long period of time. Sometimes it's an indefinite period, and the 3 eons which Thelema identifies are Isis, which is prehistoric times or BC. Then we've got Osiris, which is represented by classical and medieval times, and the final Aeon of Horus, which is at the present time. So we'll look at the characteristics of each of these in turn and see how they relate to the Thoth tarot. These are just some of the differences between the Rider-Waite and the Thoth tarot decks. We have adjustment replacing justice, lust replacing strength, and also the numbers are different between the two. And same here, we have adjustment as being trump number 8 of the Major Arcana series, whereas justice is number 11, and here we have lust as number 11 and strength as number 8. Down here we have the art card, which replaces temperance. So we can see in these 3 pairings, the cards, although different, are very similar in terms of the overall theme of the card, whereas when you get to the final pairing here, which is Judgment and Eon, the Eon card looks very different to the Judgment card. You can't really see any similarities here. With the Judgment card, we're supposedly having people rising from their graves, and with the Eon card we have a lot of information there, which I go into in the particular video on that trump. So the Eon from this we can see is showing us something very different with regards to what the Thoth deck is there to represent. If we go to the Hierophant here, he holds in his right hand the wand of 3 eons, and the child here in the star of the Hierophant is the child Horus. The Hierophant himself is Osiris, and the woman here is Isis. So we have the 3 eons represented in the Hierophant. We'll go and look now at the first Aeon, which is that of Isis. So we have the first Aeon here of Isis, which is prehistoric, and it's the age of the great goddess and associated with the astrological age of Leo. So there was a connection here between the divine feminine and the earth, because just as the earth gives forth life, so does the goddess, so does woman. And also it was noted that her menstrual cycles coincided with phases of the moon. So the goddess and women were seen as the source of life itself, and the role of men not really understood in the reproductive process. Other goddesses associated with this Aeon are Artemis here, who I've spoken about, the goddess of the forests and deer, and I've spoken about her in various videos throughout the series. So we'll now move on to the second Aeon of Osiris. The second Aeon is that of Osiris, who we see here on the left, and this is the Aeon of the dying god and is associated with the astrological age of Pisces. So in this Aeon, people were more advanced in things like agriculture, and also the role of the sun in growing crops was more fully understood, as well as the role of men in the birth process. in preventing women from being barren. So just as we have the masculine sun, important for life on earth, which is the feminine, so man was also important in the birth of a child. So we have this blend of the masculine and the feminine. Osiris himself is usually distinguished as the god of afterlife, the underworld, and the dead, but more appropriately really the god of transition, resurrection and regeneration. And it's this resurrection that we see in the Judgment card that we looked at in the Rider-Waite deck. So what Crowley was saying is that this card represents an old Aeon, and this is where we get Christ, who was born, crucified and resurrected, if you want to look at that purely in terms of a physical event. Others associated with this period are Attis and Dionysus. And this period was characterized by a growing fascination with death rather than the mystery of life. And they thought that the sun died at night in the west and was reborn in the east, and that it became weaker in the winter time. So links, as I said, were made between man and the sun and woman and the moon, and human sacrifices were made to the gods, with the religious people having power over the common people. These were blood sacrifices which were done in reverence to the sun to make sure that it rose again each day. And these sometimes took the form of human sacrifices, but these were replaced by animal sacrifices, and then eventually you had the ritual of the bread and wine. So that is where the ritual of the bread and wine actually comes from, is human sacrifice. So the main point here is the fact that it relates back to the Rider-Waite deck, and that this particular Aeon, and therefore this card representation, is now out of date, and that's where we get this new Aeon card formulated by Crowley and Frieda Harris, and that represents the next Aeon, which is the Aeon of Horus. So here we have the final Aeon of Horus, and we can see here we have the all-seeing eye at the top here, and that is represented on the dollar bill. I'm sure many of you know that. And there's a little picture of Horus here. Horus is said to be the son of both Isis and Osiris, which represented the first two Aeons. And this is borne out in the Aeon card itself. And when we come to the Aeon card, it can be very confusing when you go into detail of this, because there's all sorts of different names that crop up. So before looking at the Aeon card itself, what this Aeon is associated with is the age of Aquarius, and this is known as the Aeon of the crowned and conquering child, the ever-living sun. In other words, people knew more about the sun's movement, that it didn't die at night, it just moves over to the other side of the world. And we had this idea of continuous life, and that death was an illusion. And it was a time for self-realization, and as we can see, that's really what the all-seeing eye represents. And a growing interest in spiritual matters and the evolution of the soul. So today, in 2019, we see an increase in spiritual groups, the growth of things like vegetarianism, veganism, alternative medicines, all sorts of things. And in this Aeon, Crowley emphasised the need to follow one's true will, or the soul direction in life, and that will is combined with the universal love. So altogether, an Aeon far different from the other two. So we'll now, with that background to this Aeon, just quickly go through the Aeon card and its relationship to the stelae of revealing. So the Stele of Revealing seen here on the right is basically an Egyptian religious artifact dating from the 26th Egyptian dynasty, which is around 664 to 525 BC. And a stele is like a wooden tablet overlain with like an aggregate decorative coating, and it's painted with mythological scenes and hieroglyphic writing, and it was made to commemorate the death of a priest whose name I cannot pronounce, down here on the right hand side here. So this is the priest here, and this is the female goddess Nuit here, as we can see. We have Hadit, and that is a male. So we've got Hadit here and Hadit here on the Aeon card. The thing to grasp about these two is that with the Aeon card here, we can see that the scene is full on, whereas on the Stele of Revealing it is side on. So what we are meant to look at, or the perspective we're meant to grasp, is the fact that we in looking at the card here are taking the place of the priest here in the Stele of Revealing, looking directly at Horus. The Stele was linked to the Aeon card because when Crowley was visiting a museum in Cairo where this stele was being displayed, I think it was 1904, somewhere around there, he received a channeling about which became the Book of the Law. So through seeing this artifact, there was like psychic communication given to Crowley in terms of spiritual understanding of the new Aeon. One of the tricky things to understand about the Aeon card is the fact that there are two forms of the god Horus. You have an active form called Ra-Hu-Kuit, as we see here and here, but you also have a passive form of Horus, Hu-Pa-Krat, and that's the sort of ephemeral outline here with the figure having his finger to the lips there, indicating silence. Another name for Hu-Pa-Krat is Hippocrates, and that's the passive form of Horus. So the key points with regards to this is the Aeon card represents the new Aeon of Horus, starting from the previous Aeon of Osiris, and in the stele we have the perspective of observing the scene. In the Aeon card we have replaced the priest, so we're looking directly at Horus ourselves. Horus is the product of the union between Hadit and Nuit, or Nut. That's the female goddess, and Hadit the winged globe, and is known by his special name Heru-Ra-Ha. So again, this is where it becomes tricky, because Heru-Ra-Ha is the name associated with Horus in the Aeon card, and he has the form of the twins, which are his both active and passive forms, which we've gone into here. So the active form is Ra-Hu-Kuit and passive form is Hu-Pa-Krat. And these twins are seen in different trumps of the Thoth deck. Here they're outlined in the Fool, here we have them in the Lovers, and we see them again in the Sun card. And we'll go through those in detail as and when. So just to finish this video off, I think with regards to these Aeons, for me, they're a little bit idealised. they're probably just looking at trends in society, because there are always going to be people who are spiritually aware no matter what the overall culture or the predominant culture is of that era. For instance, today, Glastonbury 2019, we have the Goddess Temple, that's Glastonbury in the UK, where people come to both worship and have many spiritual realizations as well. So I think the main grasp of this tutorial is just to see that there are 3 eons which Thelema have actually identified, and that the Thoth deck is based around moving from the previous eons to the new eon. And so a little bit of understanding about the background of these is hopefully a help. Okay, the next card is the Empress.